Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Digital Law News, a weekly webinar and podcast that we put out discussing what's going on in the news, basically, that relates to the work that we carry out at work and discuss in our weekly meetings. Just in case you don't know, Digital Law is a law firm based in Barnsley in the UK, and it specialises in all matters to do with digital law and technology, so things like data protection, international data transfers, website compliance, and all things like that. So I'll just pass over to Peter to introduce himself as well.
Thank you very much, Laura, and hello everyone, and welcome to this week's update. Indeed, Digital Law, we are currently doing a lot of work, as you can imagine, working with in particular digital tech startups, but also for a range of different organizations, from law firms, professional practices, financial services organizations, on everything from digital and data compliance, privacy concerns, through to some of the business resilience issues raised by the conditions that we've all had to deal with during the lockdown this year. So great to be speaking to you today and to hopefully share a little bit of our expertise with you in talking about some of the issues that have been in the news this week.
Yeah, definitely. So right, let's first kick off with the first story. So this one is regarding WhatsApp. So a lot of us probably use WhatsApp and probably have used WhatsApp more regularly over the last couple of months when trying to stay in touch with family and friends or even work colleagues. But this is about how WhatsApp basically endeavour to be really secure because of the end-to-end encryption that they applied in 2017. So I think prior to 2016, so prior to 2016, the end-to-end encryption, which is now on the system, wasn't by default, but now it has been changed to default. So that means that it's automatically applied. So this means that as the company is owned by Facebook, Facebook can't read or mine any data from the content of the messages that you send and receive. However, this doesn't mean it is completely private. So this article was written and basically gives some recommendations on how you can make sure that your WhatsApp conversations are still completely private or at least more secure. So some of the recommendations are turning off iCloud backups, turning on two-factor authentication, and stopping people from seeing your personal information. So unless you're connected to them and talk to them, they won't see any of the information that you keep on your profile.
Yes, it's an interesting article, this, and well worth a read if viewers get the opportunity to take a look at this Wired article, because it goes into quite some detail with regards to the history of security on WhatsApp. But I think it's really a really good time to be reconsidering this issue, given that we know that during the lockdown, an awful lot of organizations have started using WhatsApp, sometimes for business-related purposes, when it's not necessarily good for business use. No. It's fine for personal use in terms of speaking to your family, friends, that's fine. But if you're looking to carry out business-related activity, where in particular, say you're a law firm or a financial services organization, and you need to demonstrate to a regulator you're keeping the data of your clients safe and secure, WhatsApp isn't really the platform that allows you to do that. For one thing, as you correctly highlighted there, Laura, don't forget that this is owned by Facebook, and Facebook's apps are notorious for collecting huge amounts of data. And even though the actual contents of the message might be secure, that doesn't mean that WhatsApp isn't mining all the data from your phone in terms of all the phone calls that you make. Not WhatsApp phone calls, all the phone calls that you make, all the text messages, the location where you are, the GPS data, all this sort of stuff is being mined and squirreled off back to Facebook's HQ. And I think we have to think quite carefully about, do we really want the app that we're using for business purposes to be harvesting all of that data, particularly if you're using your mobile device when you're out of the office for more work-related activity. So it might still be getting hold of phone numbers related to customers, clients, and third parties. The other key thing is that just because it says, oh, WhatsApp is encrypted, does not then mean that it is therefore safe and secure. One of the dangers with WhatsApp is you aren't necessarily always sure exactly who else is on the WhatsApp discussion, particularly if you're in a large conversation group. Have other people been added to that distribution list? Is quite a key issue. And if you can't be sure, then certainly do not share any data on there, any documents, etc. Ultimately, if you're wanting to have a facility like this to talk to colleagues in your team or to talk to clients if you want to have that instant messaging, I would consider something like BlackBerry Messenger as a secure app that you can then use solely for that purpose. But WhatsApp should not be used for business related purposes.
Yeah, completely. So moving on to our next story. So this is regarding the effects that COVID-19 is having on data protection. And some people are even saying that this could set data protection back in the UK, back by a generation. So a lot of us know, obviously, when you're going to a pub or a bar or a restaurant, a cafe at the minute, you're having to give all your personal data over. And so this means that the hospitality industry in particular have had to become data protection experts overnight. And without the correct training or the management systems in place to control that data collection, many venues are not actually keeping that data secure or using it for different purposes for what is collected. So say for marketing reasons, etc. So this not only puts their customers in risk of data protection breach, obviously, the company themselves are obviously at risk of fines by regulators, so the ICO, or by legal action. And one example of this is a postgraduate student who was at the University of Oxford. She was in a bar and she actually received a Facebook message from a bartender who works at a local pub. And from what I got, from the gist that I got from the story, she didn't know this bartender, he didn't know her. The only way he could have found out her name is from a form that she filled out when she went into that bar. So obviously that shows that people are not using the data for the correct reason and obviously breaching GDPR.
Indeed, and actually, Digital Law, we did a webinar a couple of months back now in the run-up to hospitality venues opening again to help them with a lot of the issues around data collection and data security, because it is a huge obligation that's been placed on the hospitality sector to collect all of this information and process it. And there are a lot of apps out there purporting to help the hospitality sector in doing this that are not necessarily safe and secure products. And then there is the added risk, as highlighted in this incident, whereby staff at the venue might not understand the importance of how you handle the personal data once it's been collected. I mean, one of the key issues right up there at the top of GDPR, as it says, data should only be used for the purpose for which it was intended when it is collected. So if data is being collected for the purposes of test and trace, it shouldn't then be used by this bartender as his personal form of Tinder, basically, to then get back in touch with patrons who may have come into the venue. And it's the most fundamental breach, but it also illustrates the fact that the bartender clearly hasn't been told you shouldn't be doing that. This is only supposed to be tested for the purposes of be collected for the purposes of supporting test and trace, nothing else. And not only have you got the unscrupulous staff, but I have heard of some venues that have then just taken all this data wholesale, shoved us onto the mailing list, and now people are receiving bulk marketing emails solely because they've checked in because they had to for test and trace. So just because you've gone and got a drink somewhere does not mean that you have then said, yes, please spam the life out of me with all of your marketing emails for the next decade. And it's this blatant breach of GDPR and e-privacy that the venues simply do not know that they are breaching these rules. And it is a big question for the regulator. Do they turn around and enforce and fine some of these venues, potentially quite a bit? Or are they going to then back off? Because we know the hospitality sector is at risk, which is the whole reason why the Chancellor's just done the Eat Out to Help Out scheme, and why there's been this push to get people back into hospitality. So if they then turn around and say, fine a pub chain £1.5 million because of this and wipe out any money they may have made over the last month, what kind of a message does that send out? Well, it sends out that data protection is important, but then what if it pushes businesses into insolvency as well? So it's a very difficult job that the Information Commissioner is going to have, because issues like this will have been reported to the ICO. And in that instance, with the member of the bar staff who did that, well, actually, that is something that you'd be minded to enforce against the organisation, because marketing is one thing, but where someone is then receiving an unwanted personal communication of that nature, that's due to an even more fundamental flaw in the training of that organisation. And therefore, who knows, that is the sort of thing that could quite easily lead to a fine from the ICO, but it's a difficult job they'll have to enforce this.
Yeah, definitely. I know, coming back to how you said a lot of companies using this as like a way to get people marketing. A few pubs that I've been into, you've had to fill out all your information, and then at the bottom it's like tick here if you don't want to receive marketing. But obviously, if you go into a pub, you might have had a few drinks before, you probably won't realise they actually says that until you then get the emails in your inbox.
Exactly, and I think that's actually quite if we looked at the scrutiny on there, usually to say it's got to be a positive action that's taken, in terms of usually tick here so that you will receive these, not tick here so you don't receive it. In the same way, some organisations use, for example, the previously populated checkbox is a popular thing, whereby it'll be, please untick this if you do not wish to receive it. And things like that make it a more difficult process than it should be. But I think the key thing for people when they are booking their tables and then buying their drinks using apps, as seems to be the way in the new abnormal where we are now, is just to actually think, well, which venues have I gone to? And then if you do start getting spam from them, you might actually want to think, I'm not sure if I'm going to go back there, because if they aren't using my data properly, that doesn't really, it doesn't really give you an awful lot of confidence in the way those places are run, even if they're only small places. The fact that they're then putting your email onto a marketing list makes you think, well, if they're doing that, what else are they doing with this data? Are they selling it? Are they trying to do things with it to supplement their income right now? So it's certainly something to consider. And unfortunately, because of the panic to get businesses open, compliance with data protection law has fallen significantly down the list of priorities for an awful lot of organisations. And where this is going to be the result, we're going to see lots of stories like this in the coming weeks and months.
Yeah, definitely. So moving on to his next story. So this is one from Microsoft. So they've actually carried out a survey recently into how the pandemic has affected cybersecurity. So they've carried out a survey which over, I think, nearly 800 businesses undertook. And these are businesses who have employees in India, the UK, the US, and there's a few other countries on that list as well. So 58% of the people who responded said they actually increased security budgets due to the pandemic. 82% of those asked said they plan to employ or add additional security staff, and 81% feel pressure to lower security costs. And I've also just added a slide onto a graph onto the next slide as well to show you how many people are thinking about cybersecurity. So that shows that 20% of people in total from these businesses have implemented multi-factor or two-factor identification. So 17% are doing endpoint device protection. So this could be end-to-end user encryption. 16% of people are using anti-phishing tools. 14% are using VPN, and 12% are doing some type of education, so training basically.
This is a very revealing survey, and it's great when we actually get a broad brush survey like this covering 800 different organisations and try and get some clear patterns. It's interesting to see the data points. And here we have, same as the story you brought up earlier, Laura, this one as well, that column on the left looks at multi-factor authentication.
Yeah.
which is becoming essential if you've got staff logging into apps outside of the office. To have that level of multi-factor authentication is becoming absolutely crucial. I'm intrigued though that VPN is actually such a small result, but in terms of only 14% total. But at least actually it's the UK where more people appear to be using VPNs than anywhere else, and that is another fairly straightforward measure you can take that at least increases the level of security that you have with regards to the connection that you're using when you're working from home to then access business-related email or systems.
Yeah.
The other key thing is I think we're going to get a lot of quite interesting data like this that looks at patterns during the lockdown, and the questions on the previous slide were sort of talking about the level of spending and the awareness of these issues. And I think actually because of lockdown and more people working from home, senior management in organizations now have a better understanding of the risk. They're now familiar with the technology, they've had to use it themselves, and they can see what some of the risks are. And as a result, they are seeing what those risks are and thinking we do have to mitigate this. So there is generally more awareness and indeed more spending on security. But then at the same time, all budgets are now going to be at risk as we knuckle down for what's going to be a very difficult economic period. Economic hardships and a recession the size of which no one has ever seen before because it's outside of living memory. The last time the UK went through the size of recession of the type we're going to see was more than 350 years ago. So it kind of shows that all of us will be having to tighten our belts, all organizations will be looking at budgets, and while they're realizing that security is an issue, can they necessarily afford to pay for some of the rather expensive security solutions that are out there? That's going to be the challenge for the coming year.
Yeah, definitely. I think it'd be interesting to see if a similar survey comes out later in the year or maybe next year to see if this has had an effect, so people carry on implementing these things, or it's just while people are working from home.
Yes, I think that now, I mean, it's interesting that we're talking now in the first week in September. Apparently the data from various GPS devices suggests that more people were going back to work in towns and city centres today, as of the 1st of September, with the schools going back here in the UK. Well, certainly in England and Wales. The issue, though, is are we still going to have high volumes of people working from home? Will some of the security risks that have been identified from doing that continue to develop? Will organizations roll out greater levels of security to deal with some of these risks? One issue that's also come to light, and this is the sort of thing, again, that a VPN would help, is that I was talking to a cyber specialist earlier today who was saying that they are aware that many staff were sort of bounced into having to work from home at short notice and may have been using workarounds. So they could have been using things like Google Docs or their private Gmail or the iCloud for business related activity. You've also got the problem of if people have been using their personal devices to work from home over the last few months, what about if they've got files on there that are saved that should have been saved on the work network, but for whatever reason they couldn't do it? So there is going to be a real challenge when it comes to business resilience in the weeks ahead as we start this sort of restart and recover process. And I agree, it's going to be interesting to see what the findings are. I mean, it's great when we get a sort of snap survey like this, but as we get richer data towards the end of the year and then more studies done on this in 2021 and onwards, I think we'll get a bigger picture of the sea change in terms of people's use of technology and indeed their awareness of the risk, and it will come down to a big change taking place in 2020 because of this unique set of conditions. Yeah,
definitely. So this is our last story. So this one is regarding some cybersecurity attacks that are going on in New Zealand at the moment. So the New Zealand's Cybersecurity Centre and the Government Communications Security Bureau has issued a warning to all New Zealand businesses to be prepared for cybersecurity attacks. This is followed by almost a week of daily attacks on the New Zealand Stock Exchange. And this centre has actually warned, saying that the attacks are part of a worldwide malicious cyber activity. So New Zealand's government will be going on to share this information with government links with people and intelligence alliances such as Five Eyes.
Indeed, it seems that a lot of these types of attacks are denial of service attacks. That's where websites end up being hit by multiple servers logging on in an attempt to then take a network down. So it could be, for example, sending millions of emails to a single email address in 0.8 of a second, or inundating a individual page on a website and taking it offline. You can imagine if those sorts of attacks are being perpetrated on a stock exchange, let's face it, something that you would expect to have significant levels of cybersecurity defenses in place. If they're being affected, and if they're, the infrastructure of a site like that would be large and capable of dealing with significant attacks like this, the fact that then they're being taken down shows the serious level and nature of these attacks. What was interesting reading between the lines on this article was, what is the origin of these things? Are they necessarily, I wonder, are some of these attacks state-sponsored? We know that some countries, for example, North Korea, Iran, are state sponsors of cyber attacks and cyber activity, and have invested a huge amount of resources in these sorts of things. So if they're attacking the infrastructure of other countries like a stock exchange, that doesn't surprise me. That wouldn't surprise me. Or are we looking here at the more usual suspects from using tools from the dark web? The slightly scary thing to think of is that it is increasingly easy to be able to purchase the material online from the dark web for like $15 to $20 to allow you to undertake these fairly sophisticated attacks. Which means, of course, there will end up being more of them. But I think the other thing to bear in mind is that New Zealand as a country has sort of been through the worst of the outbreak and come out on the other side. And if they're now suffering these sorts of attacks, I think it's for all of the countries as they now emerge from their lockdown conditions and try and get back to work, this shows that there is going to be a significant challenge with potential cyber attackers out there looking to take systems down just at the point where countries will be hoping to rely on them as they do the whole return, restart and recover process following the pandemic.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting to look out if any patterns emerge regarding that.
Yes, I think the positive, I think, though, out of this story is the fact that at least there are the multilateral organisations to help on this. So information is being shared via Interpol. There are government-to-government links in terms of intelligence sharing. So I'm sure that the National Cybersecurity Centre there in New Zealand is sharing data with the National Cybersecurity Centre in the UK, and indeed across that Five Eyes network. And it is actually through the sharing of that data that it is possible to actually do something about the points of origin of these attacks. One of the big ways that the UK National Cybersecurity Centre operates is to draw together all the intelligence from different cyber attacks across the UK to then work out, right, who's being targeted, how are they being targeted, where are they vulnerable, so that the NCSC can then collectively do something about it. So a lot of their job is actually just collating that intelligence to then read those patterns. So as you quite rightly say, Laura, as we get more of an idea of where these attacks are coming from, the more that these countries will then hopefully be able to defend their economies from similar attacks in future.
Yeah, great. So that was our last story. So we just wanted to mention here as well about a special offer that we have on at the minute for our listeners. So this is a GDPR compliance manual for legal services. So this was originally published back in 2018 when GDPR came into force at £195. However, we do have a discount on this at the moment, which is 50% off, and it can be given to you in hard copy or digital copy, just for an extra £5 for postage and packaging. So I'll just pass over to Peter to tell you a little bit more about the documents.
Yes, thank you, Laura. It contains a lot of forms and templates and checklists to help you with dealing with the practicalities of demonstrating compliance with GDPR. So it helps you to establish within your organization some of the governance, some of the policies that you need to have in place in order to say that you have the organizational capability to demonstrate compliance with GDPR. So this manual sort of takes the standards that GDPR says this is what you need to do. GDPR, of course, is very good at saying this is what you need to do, but it doesn't say how you should do it. This manual goes a long way to telling you how to do it. While it is designed for law firms, it also works well for the professional practices. So we've had accountants and people in the financial services industry buy copies as well, and they've given us really good feedback on it. And it basically helps to establish those checks and balances that help when it comes to demonstrating compliance, and so you can get a plan in place and do something about it. So we can highly recommend it. It's half price, and you can get it in the hard copy or the digital copies as well. So if you want to get hold of that, then please do contact us.
Yep, great. Yeah, so if you do want to get a copy of that, just drop us an email at admin@digitallawuk.com or to admin@ansonevaluate.com, who was the co-author of that as well. So thank you everyone for listening. Just to remind you, this is available on demand on a webinar, which will be posted on our YouTube channel or via podcast on Spotify, Apple, or any other podcast that you decide to listen to. So thank you for listening, and it will be live again next Tuesday at 4 p.m. Thank you. Goodbye.